The grand arena of Etherius Rift stretched across the horizon, a sprawling expanse built atop a massive, ancient asteroid that drifted to the heart of the Zorith Nebula. The air vibrated with energy as billions of spectators from countless galaxies gathered for the most anticipated event in the universe, the Celestial Convergence Tournament. Glimmering, translucent beings floated by in perfect harmony, their bodies composed of solidified light. At their sides, massive, shifting serpents of shadow, Zalorians, ancient creatures that controlled time itself, moved with liquid precision, weaving through the crowds. Amidst a vast array of sentient species were creatures of all kinds, silica elves whose bodies sang with harmonic resonance, the gas-breathing Vorthians, their gaseous forms condensed only within specially engineered spherical containment suits, and towering Krylox behemoths, whose very footsteps altered the gravity around them. The atmosphere thrummed with anticipation as the event began. The Tournament of Celestial Convergence, where the universe's greatest warriors and minds would face off in challenges of intelligence, strength, and strategy, an event that had stood for millennia, drawing crowds from across the galaxies. It was a sacred gathering, revered for its dedication to tradition and ritual. Yet, as the procession of champions paraded into the arena, there was one among them who stood apart. A human, a species not known for its power or prestige among the stars, much less for their ability to withstand the complex challenges of galactic combat. Adrian Chun, walking into the arena, wearing a worn-out hoodie and a pair of sneakers. He was a stark contrast to the regal and towering figures around him. His mere presence seemed out of place, a disruption in the cosmic order. The murmurs of disbelief echoed throughout the arena. How could a human, an unpredictable, chaotic species, dare to challenge the greatest of the galactic elite? The air around the arena seemed to warp just a little. The cosmos, it seemed, was about to learn something it never expected. Humanity was not just a player. It was a force that would redefine everything. Adrian Chun, Earth's first champion to qualify for the Celestial Convergence Tournament, stood in the preparation area, a stark contrast to the grandiose spectacle unfolding around him, where others had spent hours meticulously perfecting their techniques, reviewing battle strategies, or entering deep meditation to align their energies. Adrian stood with a wide grin, balancing a half-empty coffee cup in one hand and casually scrolling through his phone with the other. The Krylox behemoths, towering over 8 feet tall, exchanged wary glances. Their battle armor, which could deflect orbital cannon blasts, seemed almost too delicate to hold against the casual indifference of this human. A Vorthian, encased in the glowing containment sphere, released a soft hum of disdain, its gaseous form spiraling in irritation. "Is this normal?" one of the Zalorian time manipulators asked, her voice echoing in a strange, ethereal tone as she studied the human before her. "No way this guy's gonna last," another champion murmured under his breath, adjusting his psychic amplifier. "He doesn't even have a weapon. No form. No discipline." Adrian, dressed in a simple Earth hoodie and the ever-popular Planet Earth baseball cap, raised his eyes from his phone, completely unfazed by the stares of judgment and skepticism that followed him. He looked around at the competitors, most of whom were busy fine-tuning their power sources or calibrating mystical relics for the impending matches. "Seriously," Adrian remarked with chuckle, his voice nonchalant, "this place needs better coffee. Anyone know where I can get some before things get too crazy?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. The Zalorian, whose species had mastered manipulating time itself, tilted her head in utter confusion. A silica elf glanced at her companion with a puzzled expression. How could this human, a species known for its unpredictability and lack of grandeur, possibly have the gall to walk into such an ancient and sacred space with so little care? But that was the point. Adrian Chun was chaos incarnate, unpredictable, unpolished, and completely unaware of the weight of tradition bearing down on him. As the others tightened their focus, the human began to pull out a bag of chips and casually open them, much to the astonishment of the surrounding competitors. This surely was a mistake, or a joke. Either way, Adrian was here to make a statement. He was about to show them that chaos could be more dangerous than precision. The Celestial Convergence Tournament was the most prestigious event in the galaxy, a grand battle where champions from 100 worlds fought for supremacy. A test of skill, intellect, and power, it had been dominated by seasoned warriors, mystics, and legendary tacticians for eons. But today, all eyes were on Adrian Chun, a human, who had somehow, against all logic, made it to the final round. The betting odds were astronomical. Statistical impossibility was a phrase that kept flashing across screens, as if the universe itself was trying to warn anyone who dared place their credits on the Earthling. Across the arena, Grandmaster Zixo, the reigning champion, stood tall in his ceremonial robes. He had been undefeated for 3 centuries. His mastery of Zulin, the ancient and revered combat form, was unparalleled. As the last of his kind, a Drakshul, his race's power was legendary, able to manipulate the very essence of battle itself. Zixo's movements were a symphony of precision, a perfect blend of strategy and power honed over generations. No one had dared challenge him for decades. Zixo adjusted the ornate Zulin sigil on his chest, his obsidian scales catching the light as his sharp, silver eyes studied the latest data on his opponent, Adrian Chun. The human had no combat training, no mystical abilities, and worst of all, no respect for the sacred rules of the tournament. He'd already caused a stir by disrespecting the Inkar oath, a cornerstone of the competition. "Is this a joke?" Zixo muttered, his voice a low growl that echoed in the quiet chambers. His attendants, a group of elite Krylock sentinels, exchanged glances but dared not speak. Zixo's reputation was built on rules, on tradition, on perfection. This human, however, seemed determined to break every single one of them. And yet, here he was, alive, unscathed, and advancing toward the final match. As the countdown to the battle began, Zixo's mind raced. His every victory had been earned through a combination of wisdom, skill, and unshakable discipline. Adrian, on the other hand, was chaos embodied. Unpredictable, illogical, and disturbingly effective. It wasn't just a battle that weighed heavily on Zixo. It was the entire tradition of the tournament. If he lost to this human, it would be a blow to everything he stood for, to everything the galaxy revered. But Zixo wasn't just worried about losing. There was something else, something that gnawed at him. How was this human winning? What power did he have that made him so dangerous? The announcer's voice boomed, cutting through Zixo's thoughts. The final round of the Celestial Convergence Tournament is about to begin. Adrian Chun, Earth's first representative, faces the undefeated Grandmaster Zixo, who will reign supreme. Zixo straightened, his claws sharpening with anticipation. This would be no ordinary match. The odds were against Adrian, yes, but it was the chaos he represented that truly terrified the universe. As the arena buzzed with anticipation, Adrian Chun strolled casually toward the preparation area, completely unfazed by the 1,000 eyes on him. The Krylock sentinels, towering over 6 meters tall and cloaked in shimmering black armor, stood like silent statues, their gaze fixed on Adrian. Most competitors would have been meditating, psyching themselves up in the most disciplined manner possible. But Adrian? He was busy untangling his headphones and blasting Earth's most ridiculous workout playlist. "All right," he muttered to himself, bouncing on the balls of his feet. "Let's get this over with." His warm-up routine was unlike anything the cosmos had ever seen. While competitors around him, including a Varlian warlock who could summon storm clouds with a flick of their wrist, and a seraphic titan whose sheer mass could obliterate mountains, were practicing their advanced combat stances, Adrian was doing something entirely different. He stood at the center of the room and launched into a series of jumping jacks that sent his earth-made sneakers slapping against the ground with loud, rhythmic thuds. Every time his feet hit the floor, his surroundings seemed to ripple in confusion, as if the very air was unsure how to handle such basic human energy. "What in the universe is he doing?" whispered one of the Zelrith, an alien with eyes that glowed with an ethereal yellow light, its tentacles twitching in perplexity. "No idea," another competitor, a Zelyrian shapeshifter, responded, its liquid form rippling as it watched Adrian's strange routine. "But I think it's supposed to be warm-up." Without missing a beat, Adrian switched to burpees, launching himself in the air like a wild, uncoordinated blur. The Trent hose, a race of living crystal beings, vibrated at a high frequency, their edges shimmering with what could only be described as laughter. "Just gotta keep it simple," Adrian said with a grin, giving a thumbs up to a Gibion, an insectoid creature who was hovering in a containment sphere. The Gibion blinked twice, clearly baffled. Somewhere in the distance, Zixo stood, watching the human's antics with growing dismay. His normally composed demeanor faltered for a moment as Adrian executed a sprawling leg stretch, contorted his body in ways that seemed borderline absurd. If this is his strategy, Zixo muttered to himself, he may very well be the greatest threat I've ever faced. As Adrian finished his routine with a dramatic stretch and an exaggerated sigh, he stood tall and looked around. He caught the gaze of a Plorathian, a telepathic species known for their sharp mental focus. Adrian winked and said, "Hope you're not thinking too hard. I'm just here for a good time." The Plorathian's mental focus wavered, and for a split second, the creature's form flickered between dimensions. It wasn't sure whether to be amused, confused, or terrified. Adrian grinned, clearly enjoying the chaos he was causing. No one in this universe had ever seen preparation quite like his. "All right," he said, rolling his shoulders. "Let's go do this thing. This'll be fun." Match 1, Adrian versus the Quantum Monk. The Quantum Monk, a being composed entirely of shifting energy patterns, was known for his ability to manipulate the minds of his opponents. With a calm but stern posture, he began projecting intricate thought patterns designed to induce disorientation. His aura shimmered, swirling with invisible thought webs that seemed to choke the air around him. Adrian blinked a few times, his eyes adjusting to the weight of the monk's mental assault. But instead of crumbling under the pressure like all other challenges before him, Adrian took a deep breath and calmly closed his eyes. "What's he doing?" muttered a confused voice in the stands. The monk focused harder, projecting wave after wave of disorienting thoughts, attempting to drive Adrian to madness. Adrian's lips curled into a smirk. With the most casual of gestures, he pulled out his phone from his pocket, activated his 99 bottles of beer playlist, and hit play. He began humming along with the tune. 99 bottles of beer on the wall. 99 bottles of beer. The monk froze mid-assault, his delicate energy threads faltering in confusion. His translator buzzed erratically, a glitchy voice stammering, "What is this technique?" Adrian kept humming, oblivious of the alien spectacle he was creating. The monk's attempt to dominate Adrian's mind were no match for the relentless chaos of Earth's most ridiculous song. Unable to maintain focus, the monk disintegrated into a burst of energy, collapsing in defeat. Well, that was easy. Adrian shrugged, the crowd stunned into silence. Match 2, Adrian versus the Gibion. Next up was a Gibion, an insectoid species known for its agility and ability to project force field at will. The Gibion darted around the arena in a flurry of rapid motion, trying to gain the upper hand with its advanced defensive shields. With sharp pincers and the agility of a fighter jet, it was a sight to behold. Adrian stood still, waiting for the Gibion to approach, his hands in his pockets like he was waiting for a bus. The crowd gasped as the Gibion launched itself at Adrian, its pincers glowing with energy. Just as the Gibion closed the distance, Adrian whipped out a laser pointer from his bag and pointed it directly at the creature's eyes. The Gibion, caught completely off guard, froze in midair, its movement stuttering as it tried to focus on the tiny red dancing in front of its face. Adrian smirked and casually sidestepped the Gibion, sending it tumbling into a nearby force field. "Well, that was easier than I thought," Adrian said with a shrug, completely unbothered. Match 3, Adrian versus the Seraphic Titan. The final match of the day brought Adrian up against the mighty Seraphic Titan, an enormous, winged, energy-infused being capable of harnessing the power of the stars. With wings the size of a battle cruiser and fists that could punch through a planet's core, the Titan was a living force of nature. The Titan's eyes glowed with radiant light, and it cracked its knuckles, ready to engage. Adrian stood there, totally unfazed. As the Titan launched itself at Adrian, the energy from its wings creating sonic booms, Adrian simply pointed at its feet and yelled, "Hey, look out!" A space chicken. The Titan's confusion was instantaneous. It faltered, its wings momentarily losing their power as it glanced down at the arena floor, expecting to see some kind of alien poultry. Taking advantage of the moment, Adrian did a backflip, completely unprompted, and kicked the Titan's shin. The Titan stumbled, losing its balance, and Adrian grabbed a loose rock from the arena floor, tossing it lightly in its direction. "All right, my bad. No chickens here." Adrian grinned as the Titan struggled to regain control. The crowd erupted in laughter, some unsure if they had witnessed the greatest display of combat brilliance or the most chaotic accident. Either way, the Titan collapsed, utterly perplexed. "This is how we do it back on Earth, folks." Adrian waved to the stunned audience, stepping over the Titan's giant, falling for him like it was no big deal. By the time Adrian had beaten his third opponent, the once proud combatants were left stunned, uncertain of what they had just witnessed. One thing was clear: this human was something no one had anticipated. Grandmaster Zixo sat in the dimly lit chamber, his fingers tracing the edges of an ancient tome, the pages glowing faintly with holographic energy. The air was thick with the scent of old parchment and the hum of time-worn devices. The tournament was almost over, and the time for the final confrontation with Adrian was approaching. Zixo, an ancient and undefeated being, had seen every combat style imaginable over his 3 centuries of mastery. He had taught the greatest minds of the galaxy, wielded his powers of time manipulation with an elegance known only to the wisest beings of the universe. His combat techniques were perfect, honed to precision over countless battles. There were rules to be followed, traditions to honor, and expectations to meet. But as he watched the recordings of Adrian's matches, his thoughts grew more fragmented, his irritation mounting. What was this? He replayed the scene where Adrian had humiliated the quantum monk with an earthling song. How had he ignored the mental trap laid before him? How had the monk, a master of mental clarity, been defeated by such an absurdity? His scales flickered, moving through a strange pattern, a rhythmic shift between red and purple hues, signaling agitation. He called up the next match, where Adrian had faced a Gibeon, a creature whose agility was unrivaled. The energy blast of the Gibeon had been countered by a laser pointer? It made no sense. Zixo's mind could not comprehend the chaos this human was creating. Adrian's methodless style was, in essence, a mockery of everything Zixo had spent centuries refining. "This human is unpredictable," Zixo muttered, his deep voice reverberating through the hollow chamber. "His approach is not following any combat principle I know. This is not even combat. He's toying with them." Zixo sat back, the thought of this mere human, this outsider from a primitive, insignificant planet, challenging the galaxy's most honored traditions, sparked a deep sense of unease. To Zixo, combat was sacred, a structured dance where discipline, control, and mastery were paramount. This human, this chaotic force, was redefining the game. He wasn't merely breaking the rules. He was breaking the very fabric of the game itself. Zixo clenched his fists. The matches he had watched were not victories in the traditional sense. Adrian was not using strength or skill in the expected ways. His actions defied all logic, circumventing the rigid boundaries of combat Zixo and his peers had built over millennia. "He's breaking the game," Zixo repeated aloud, the weight of the realization sinking in. "And that is what terrifies me." Zixo had mastered precision, his every move measured, calculated, perfect. But Adrian, he was chaos incarnate. In a world where every tactic and strategy had been dissected and perfected, chaos had no place. Zixo realized with growing horror that chaos was winning. And if chaos could win, then no one was safe. In the final confrontation, Zixo would have to confront more than just a human. He would face an anomaly, something that could undo everything he had ever known about combat and strategy. He had prepared for many things over his long life, but he had never prepared for this. As the shadows deepened around him, Zixo's resolve hardened. This human, Adrian, would be his greatest test, and perhaps the end of an era. The arena was electric, the air thick with tension and the buzzing of thousands of voices. In the grand coliseum of Nexus Prime, spectators from every corner of the galaxy watched with bated breath, their eyes glued to the holographic displays of the Tournament of the 10 Galaxies. Adrian Chun, the human from Earth, was about to step onto the battlefield for the semifinals. Outside the arena, betting markets had gone haywire. Error does not compute. The messages flashed across screens in galaxies far and wide, as the odds of Adrian's success, a statistical impossibility, were too insane to process. How had this human, with no formal combat technique, made it this far? No technique, no honor, no tradition. Yet here he was, on the verge of the final match that would determine the champion of the universe. As Adrian walked toward the arena, the murmurs of competitors and spectators grew louder. He wasn't just a human. He was an anomaly, a living disruption. His next opponent, Lord Kyra, an ancient entity from the Zentian Nebula, had never lost a match in its millennia of existence. Known for a precise, surgical combat style that bent time and space, Kyra was a master of strategy, its movements as predictable as a sunrise. But against Adrian, a man who ate junk food for breakfast and used a laser pointer to confuse a monk, what could Kyra do? The crowd, which had been in a state of stunned silence for much of Adrian's previous victories, had begun to buzz with a mixture of excitement and confusion. They had never seen anything like this before. One crystalline being leaned toward a gas mask competitor, shaking its head. How can a human, be doing this? Where is the strategy? Nearby, a Stygian, known for its ability to read minds, folded its multiple arms in frustration. I cannot calculate his movements. It's impossible to predict. Chaos is his technique. The Stygian had once read the minds of 1,000 combatants at once, yet this human's unpredictability rendered its abilities utterly useless. At the official booth, the high-ranking Intergalactic Tournament Council exchanged uneasy glances. The great arbiter, a towering figure of gold and light, stared down at the data streams in front of him, his glowing eyes narrowing. There are no records, no precedents, no protocols to handle this, he murmured, fingers hovering over control panel. Is this acceptable? This chaos? This human? Meanwhile, Adrian stood on the arena's edge, casually inspecting his phone. To the surprise of many, he had no armor, no weapons, and certainly no pristine ceremonial garb like the other contestants. In fact, he was holding a cup of coffee, his casual demeanor a sharp contrast to the tension that gripped the rest of the galaxy. Behind him, Lord Kyra shimmered, its form swirling in and out of existence, the very air vibrating with its deadly power. It was the embodiment of control, precision, and ancient wisdom. And yet, it was Adrian's unpredictable style that had shaken the very foundations of combat. The traditional combatants were beginning to question their methods. Was tradition too rigid? Was their understanding of combat so limited? The audience, once sure that the universe's greatest warrior would emerge victorious, now found themselves questioning everything. Is this the end of the old ways? Someone whispered from the stands. Another voice followed. Or the beginning of something far more dangerous? As Adrian stepped forward, an almost unsettling calm surrounding him, the crowd hushed. His eyes met Kyra's, but there was no fear in Adrian's gaze, only the excitement of what was about to come. The stakes had never been higher, and the future of combat itself seemed to hang in the balance. "Let the final match begin," the arbiter announced, his voice echoing across the stadium. But no one was prepared for the chaos that would follow. The arena pulsed with anticipation. The two competitors, Adrian Chun and Lord Kyra, stood at opposite ends, facing each other in the vast expanse of the Nexus Prime Coliseum. The crowd was a sea of various alien species, their collective breath held as if time itself was waiting for something extraordinary to unfold. The atmosphere was thick with expectation, but no one knew what would happen next, especially not with a human facing off against one of the galaxy's oldest, most precise warriors. Lord Kyra, its form shimmering and changing shape like a living tesseract, took its first step forward, the air distorting around it with the weight of ancient power. With each movement, the arena seemed to hold its breath. It was a master of the art of strategic combat, every motion calculated with flawless precision. In contrast, Adrian stood there, hands in his pockets, a casual smirk playing on his lips. He took a quick sip from his cup of coffee before tossing it aside with a dramatic flourish. His movements were anything but coordinated. If anything, he was chaos incarnate, an unpredictable storm in the shape of a man. Kyra raised its hands, and a ripple of reality followed. folding space itself as it summoned a blade of time. It was a weapon no mortal had ever dared to face, capable of slicing through time itself, freezing an enemy mid-movement. The ancient being's voice echoed across the stadium as it spoke, a low, resonant hum that vibrated to the very bones of the onlookers. You cannot win. Time bends to my will. Adrian, however, didn't seem to care. Instead of looking worried or prepared, he casually reached into his bag and pulled out what appeared to be a tiny silver box, the most mundane object imaginable. "What is that?" One of the spectators whispered, a crystalline being with no visible mouth but a vibrating resonance in its throat. Lord Kyra raised an eyebrow, or at least Adrian assumed it was an eyebrow, given the entity's shifting, formless appearance. "This will be your end. Human." Adrian grinned, tapping a few buttons on the box. The device let out a familiar click, and suddenly a laser pointer shot out of it, casting a bright red across the battlefield. Kyra froze, the blade of time faltering in midair as its focus broke. The ancient being's glowing eyes narrowed, disoriented by the unorthodox tactic. "What is this foolishness?" it boomed. Adrian shrugged nonchalantly, shifting his weight to one foot. Just a little distraction. He flicked the laser that across Kyra's shimmering body, sending it darting in erratic directions. The ancient warrior's perfect control faltered, if only for a moment, and in that moment, Adrian struck. With a casual roll of his shoulders, Adrian launched into his infamous routine. His movements were wild, unpredictable, and completely counter to the teachings of every master in the universe. While Kyra was focused on the laser, Adrian swung his arms with erratic abandon, catching the weapon-wielding Kyra off guard. Time warped. The audience saw flashes of frozen moments and slips in time as Adrian, with his unique human adaptability, outmaneuvered Kyra's perfectly synchronized strikes. Kyra reacted, attempting to fold space around itself. But Adrian's erratic movements worked in his favor. The blade of time cut through thin air, narrowly missing Adrian by mere inches, while Adrian, with a broad grin, flipped backward, evading the slash in a way that should have been impossible. In a split second, Kyra's blade swung again, this time aiming for Adrian's heart. The crowd gasped, but Adrian's response was far from traditional. He pulled out his phone from his pocket, tapping a few buttons with the same casual nonchalance. The crowd's collective shock escalated as a random sound effect blared from the phone, an old, looping air horn noise that echoed through the arena. Kyra hesitated again, its form shifting in confusion. And Adrian, still wearing that smug grin, punched the time-bending entity right in the core, sending it reeling. Chaos wins. Adrian muttered to himself, stepping back as Kyra staggered, the air warping around it as time itself seemed to resist the blow. Lord Kyra's voice trembled with something unexpected. "Fear, maybe. Impossible," it said in a strained voice. "You fight not with strategy, but with sheer unpredictability." The ancient entity collapsed, its blade of time falling to the ground in defeat. Adrian stood tall, brushing off his humble Federation Navy gear and giving the crowd a theatrical bow. "Just another day at the office," he said, nonchalantly. "Hey, anyone have a latte?" The crowd roared to life, their cheers echoing for miles. The underdog had done it. The universe, once proud of its age-old traditions and flawless techniques, had just been shattered by the unpredictable chaos that only humanity could bring. Kyra, the timeless being, now understood. Adrian was more than just an opponent. He was a new way of fighting, a new way of living. And for the first time in millennia, Kyra saw the truth. Adaptability beats perfection every time. The universe now had a new fear, and it had a name: Earth's Chaos. As the Nexus Prime Coliseum erupted in triumphant cheer, Adrian stood in the center of the arena, his casual stance in stark contrast to the wild, flashing lights that encircled him. The tactical throne had been won. The galaxy's old guard lay in ruin, their centuries of tradition and perfect technique shattered by the erratic human who had only walked into the arena with a coffee in hand. Across the stadium, the spectators, a chaotic medley of species, stood in stunned silence, their minds unable to reconcile what they had just witnessed. The precision of Kyra, the master of the blade and the galaxy's most respected warrior, had been defeated not by superior strength, not by calculated strategy, but by disruption. Kyra, now seated, its form flickering with the echoes of the temporal distortion Adrian had caused, finally spoke. Its voice had lost its usual steady cadence, replaced by a fractured tremor of realization. I thought perfection could not be beaten. Adrian gave a nonchalant shrug, still catching his breath in an intense showdown. Perfection's great, but it's too predictable, he said, turning to face Kyra, eyes twinkling. I mean, it's like expecting a cat to not knock things off the table. Chaos, on the other hand, that's fun. For a moment, Kyra was silent, its glowing eyes reflecting a flicker of something unfamiliar. Not defeat, but understanding. The ancient entity finally nodded, its voice softening. Perhaps there's a lesson in your chaos after all. Adrian smiled, sipping his coffee, completely unfazed by the momentous event. Exactly. Rules aren't limits. They're opportunities. It's all about finding the cracks in the system and just having a little fun with them. The crowd, still roaring with excitement, was slowly beginning to understand that Adrian hadn't just defeated an opponent. He had transformed the entire competition. For centuries, combat had been a science, an art perfected by disciplined warriors. But humanity had shown them that sometimes unpredictability, spontaneity, and chaos could lead to greatness too. And just like that, a new era had begun. One where order would have to reckon with the untamed disruption of Earth's influence. The galaxy would never see combat or anything quite the same way again. As Adrian turned to leave the arena, he glanced back at the audience. They were no longer merely watching a game. They were witnessing the dawn of a new philosophy, one where rules could be bent and systems could be remade. With a casual flick of his wrist, he sent a message to Earth, which buzzed across the vast expanse of the cosmos. Mission accomplished. Ready for the next challenge. The universe, once a tightly woven fabric of ancient traditions and strategic mastery, now faced a new and unpredictable force, Earth's chaos, and its champion, Adrian Chun. Wherever he went, rules would bend, and the cosmos would learn to fear the very concept of disorder. As Adrian Chun boarded the transport ship back to Earth, he glanced out the viewport at the vast expanse of space. The stars seemed to shimmer with new possibilities, each one a potential challenge. Each one a battlefield awaiting his chaotic touch. The message he'd sent back to Earth still lingered in his mind, a grin creeping across his face as he recalled it. Mission accomplished. Send the rest. Across the galaxy, the Council of Elders gathered in the Chamber of Pure Energy, their faces flickering with a mixture of awe and terror. They had just witnessed a human, a single human, upend centuries of tradition and victory with nothing more than unpredictability. In the distance, combat academies everywhere were already shifting their curricula. Calculations would have to account for chaos. Techniques would have to account for unorthodox methods. The age-old question would be asked in every corner of the cosmos. What happens when you add Earth's chaos to the equation? At the same time, back on Earth, Adrian's message was already generating buzz. The best minds of the galaxy would now be turning their attention to Earth, where the chaos had first been born. In the hidden corners of the universe, ancient forces stirred, their calculations thrown into disarray. Was this the dawn of a new era, or the beginning of a dangerous game? Next stop? Adrian had no clue. But wherever he went, one thing was certain. Chaos was the only rule he would ever need. Somewhere in the universe, Adrian chuckled to himself, tapping his phone screen. Someone's probably writing an entire treatise on how not to beat me. With a devil-may-care grin, he set his phone down and glanced toward the infinite unknown. Bring it on.